Welcome back to Dangerous Rhetoric. This is episode 105. Before we jump into it, please like, comment, share, subscribe, all the things that help us continue doing this. And if you really want to help us continue doing this, please donate some money. We'll be happy to take your money from you. With all of that said, as usual, today we're joined by another exciting guest. We've been very lucky with the guests we've been getting on this show, and we're very grateful to all of them who take the time to speak with us. We are speaking with Tara Lee Rodas, who became quite well known as a whistleblower who approached Project Veritas while working within the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. And she volunteered to assist the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services with the processing of unaccompanied migrant children and was deployed to the emergency intake site in Sonoma, California. And we're going to talk about all of that and what Tara realized while she was there and the things that she later talked to James O'Keefe and Project Veritas about. Tara, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate this.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that you all want to shine a light on government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
It's crazy. I remember when your story broke in November, I was just like, wow, this is nuts. This is nuts that this is actually happening under the American people's nose and how many people don't know about it. So yeah, we definitely want to shine a light on it and we want to talk more about these subjects. And so we're going to get into it. But before we get into it, we like to do like a little bit of a personal background. So, where are you from? Where did you, grow up? And we'll kind of start with that. And then I guess we can get into how you got involved with the HHS.
Sure. So I was born at Fort Benning, Georgia. My dad is Army. And so I started my life there. My sister was then born at Fort Sill. My dad is Field Artillery, go Redlegs. And we moved back to Virginia after that. And I've lived in Virginia most of my life. I went to James Madison University. And, I would call myself a native Virginian, even though I was born at Fort Benning, but I really love it. And first, after college, I went to James Madison. And after that, I actually interned for a congressman and a senator. A lot of people don't know that. And that helped me see that one voice really can make a difference. And so I thought, I want to give my life to public service and helping people. And so I started off contracting to the federal government. And then I actually started my federal career with the Postal Service. And then I went into the Inspector General community, and I've been there since 2006. But for more than 20 years, I've served as a public servant. And it's an important disclaimer today. I'm not speaking on behalf of my agency or the federal government. I'm speaking on behalf of what I witnessed as a volunteer to help this administration with the border crisis and placing children. So, I volunteered in 2021. A lot of people may know that the Biden administration put out a call for all federal employees to help with the border crisis. And specifically, it was helping place these unaccompanied children. So I think a lot of people, probably like me, did not realize that hundreds of thousands of children crossed the border into the United States. And the federal government has spent billions, that's with a B, billions of dollars to distribute these children all around the United States. And I thought that this was a family reunification program.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be sending kids to their families. And as you know, from some of the other whistleblowers, that some of these sponsors of the children, they're criminals. They're high-level criminal actors, they're traffickers, they're sex trafficking and labor trafficking the children. So it was a shock, but I'm glad to be sitting here with you today to tell the story.
So how long into your volunteer work with the HHS did it take before you realized, all right, there's something weird going on here? Like, what was the first real telltale sign for you that something was not right?
Yeah. So when I first got to the site, so my background is in teaching and training. And so I really thought I'd just be, coloring with the kids and maybe helping them learn English. My husband's from El Salvador. Mi español no es perfecto, pero yo puedo hablar. So I speak.
Mine.
I can understand you, but if I tried to speak that, it would be really, it'd be like, bad of me.
Yeah. So I've traveled, in Mexico, in Guatemala, in El Salvador. And since a lot of the kids come from Guatemala, a majority actually, I thought it'd be great with my Spanish skills. I could, talk to them and help them out, not realizing that ever once was a child trafficked. So in the beginning, I was just escorting children around our site in Pomona, California. I would take them to their meals. I would take them to the medical. We had a large medical staff. So if somebody needed medical care, I could escort them there. And then I would escort them to case management, which is where they would see their case manager, whatever they needed. If it was going out to play soccer, I would escort them there. So that's what I did in the beginning. Then there was an urgent need for people in case management. So the goal was to move the children as quickly as possible. And, I thought, well, that's a good thing. We want to reunite them with their families as quickly as possible. But it only took me a couple of weeks of working in case management and seeing children in total distress and hearing stories from the case managers that didn't match up. Like the case manager saying the child is telling me one thing. Then I've talked to someone in home country who's telling me something different. And then I'm talking to the sponsor, right, which is the person who's going to be taking the child, and they're telling me something different. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. And, I'm a fairly orderly person with cases and, files and things. And I said, well, this should match up pretty easily, right? So what's the ID of the person? And let's look at the paperwork where they're saying the child is going. And these things were not matching. And I said, that's weird. So I said, look, we really need to find out, where is this child going? And then
kind of important, right?
Sort of important. Yes. I mean, and then what do you mean that the kids don't exactly know the person or haven't ever lived with them? So I thought, I'm seeing some weird things.
Yeah.
And it just none of it made sense. But remember, at this point, I had no idea one child had ever been trafficked through the program or any of my team.
So
none of the people on the site.
And you think that, the system is doing, you basically have good intentions and you think everything has good intentions.
And we want to believe that, right? We want to believe that our leaders and the people in the, the federal institutions are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that it is for the best of intentions, which obviously is not the case. Right.
And they're children. This is the thing that is mind-boggling. These are children. So, as two case managers had a brother and a sister, and the two children were crying, and the case managers came to me and one of my other federal partners, who was also a volunteer, and said, look, we really need help sorting out this case.
Yeah.
We cannot make sense of it. The kids have never lived with this person. And obviously, to start making sure we were doing quality assurance, we had developed a checklist and, an orderly way to make sure that everything was being done correctly. And we noticed so many discrepancies, and then we learned the database. Like, how does this work? How are they actually tracking who these sponsors are? And that's when we discovered that in this particular case, that multiple children over a couple of years had gone to this particular place. This was Bonita Springs, Florida, our very first suspicious sponsor case. And it involved no less than 6 sponsors, multiple addresses, and kids coming from all over the country. And I thought, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
And that's when we turned in. It was mid-June, the first suspicious sponsor, still not knowing one child had been trafficked through the program.
So you went to some higher ups and you reported this information.
Yes.
Who did you tell this to?
So there is what's called a federal field specialist.
Okay.
So I won't be naming names, but the federal field specialist on the site. And when we briefed the case to several people that day and said, we just don't understand. And the federal field specialist said, are you serious? Like, this is like 18 kids? And we said, yeah, I mean, this is what we believe we're seeing here. We're just new. The case managers, one of them was in the hospital for stress. She couldn't even make the briefing that day. She was just so upset by, what the children were saying and that nothing was matching. And so that moment, called DHS on the line. And he said, everyone in this room, shut up. He says, I need silence. And there were about 10 of us. And he said, look, this is what they're telling me right now. We need to look into this. So I believed, hey, everything's fine. People are looking into it. And so we go on and start helping quality assurance with the cases. And then we started noticing the same red flags. Multiple children, multiple addresses, children saying, I've never worked for this person, or worse. We next had the big case in Austin, which is the kids were saying, well, we were promised work. And of course, a lot of people are coming here for economic reasons, totally understandable. But the story was kind of strange in that the sponsor, who lived in Austin, Texas, owned the coffee farm where this little boy was working in Guatemala.
Oh my.
Yes. So there's a Guatemalan national here in the United States in Austin, Texas, who has a coffee farm in Guatemala.
Right.
And we find out the story that, out of the goodness of their hearts, they're gonna, pay the journey for the child to come. And then the child was gonna work in Texas to pay off the debt.
Wow.
So
About how old was this kid? Do you remember?
I think he was 15.
Wow.
Yeah. I think he was 15 years old.
Jeez.
So the boys ranged in this particular case because as we started digging, we discovered there were 4 children that had the exact same story, all going to the same sponsor in Austin.
Wow.
And 3 of those boys were at the Pecos emergency intake site. So now we had a case of 4 kids. And because I happen to know someone who went down to Pecos, I called her and I said, hey, look, I said, we have a little boy here who's telling us this story. I said, and now I see that you guys have 3 other children going to that same person. Can we get the case managers on the line? Can we have them interview the kids separately, make sure that they don't contaminate the interviews, right? And have each one of them tell their story. And all 4 children told the exact same story. I'm working on the farm in Guatemala, making $2.50 a day. They're paying the journey for me, and then they're going to give me work. And so these little boys were so proud that they were coming here, that they were going to work for $6 an hour. So remember, $2.50 a day to $6 an hour.
It's a lot for them. Yeah.
These children had no idea that they were being trafficked. They really believed they were going to be Elon Musk rich.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, they don't know any better.
They're kids.
Yeah, they're kids.
Yeah.
No, they don't know.
This is why we have such strong laws to protect children when it comes to work.
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was horrifying because these little boys, at least one of them, because I went in and read his case file after he was transferred to long-term care. We were able to report it to Office of Trafficking in Persons, and these boys went into long-term care. And I read through his case file, and he had actually never been to school, and he didn't know how to read or write. And I remember thinking, what kind of an evil person tells a child, trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. So smuggling is bringing the person across the border. But to prove trafficking for labor, there has to be force, fraud, or coercion. And they're telling these fraudulent stories to these children. Yeah. And then what is the purpose? These children are in debt bondage. You know, they'll never work themselves out from under their debt. And one of the case managers told me, the one who had one of the children who was at Pecos, she said, Tara, I was trying to joke around, and in my heart, it just hurt because, you know, you told us you thought the kids were being trafficked. And I just wanted to joke around with him and say, you know, hey, what happens if you get to the United States and, you know, you find a girl and you want to get married? And she said, Tara, she said, that little boy looked at me and said, oh no, we cannot leave sponsor. I mean, this is not right. And our federal dollars are doing this to these children.
It's like institutionalized slavery.
It is.
We're importing these kids from the third world who have no idea what's going on, no knowledge of their intrinsic value or their intrinsic rights, and they're just being exploited by adults who, you know, have the connections. And it seems like what's going on is at scale here. You're describing, you know, dozens of incidences, but probably, you know, what you saw as an individual is the tip of the proverbial iceberg.
Fraction of what is actually out there.
The fraction.
That to me is the scariest thought. Is like how many of these kids actually are out there experiencing this right now, and what is going on with them? Like how many of them are just being exploited for labor or worse, you know? And it's the worst that definitely concerns me.
Yes. And if you've seen in the news lately, right? No less than 100 children found working in slaughterhouses across the United States. No less than 100 minors. This was a bust very recently.
Yeah.
Then the New York Times, right, publishes an article about not just how the children are working here, but how the children are dying here. So this one little boy, they gave an example, his first day on the job, and this is in the New York Times, first day on the job in roofing, he fell 50 feet off of a roof and he died. And these are children. And here's the kicker, right? I had no idea one child had ever been trafficked through the program. But after this, someone sent me a copy of the Senate report going back to the trafficking cases from 2014, okay, 2014. And there's a documentary called Trafficked in America regarding this case of Guatemalan teens who were labor trafficked back in 2014 by HHS. So I saw the Senate report, and I knew that they knew. And I cannot describe the horror that I felt. Like, here I've been a public servant my whole life. I came here to help, and maybe I'm on the wrong side of the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe my efforts are sending children to bad places.
That's a scary
I thought my molecules were going to fly apart.
Oh, right. I can't even imagine, to be honest. And yeah, like you said, 2014, it's like this was already happening under the Obama administration. Like they knew about this for a while. Yeah. And that not only is upsetting, it angers me. That angers me. That makes me want to fight these people, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And it gets worse because this administration, knowing all of this that had happened, relaxed the vetting rules during the largest surge we've ever had.
Compounding the problem.
Yeah, it's
compounding the problem. And then by dumping the extra money in, they're actually creating the pull. And we are, this is a terrible, terrible truth, is the United States government is the middleman in the trafficking ring. We deliver the child to the trafficker the last mile.
That's insane.
And if I had not seen it with my own eyes, I'm not even sure I could believe it.
Right.
But, drugs, that's the only thing I can compare it to, because people understand drug trafficking. If drugs are manufactured in, let's say, Guatemala, since that's where most of the children are coming from, the traffickers have to get the drugs across Mexico. They've got to guard their stuff and they have to pay the cartels, right? And when they get to the US border, they really risk losing a lot of their product because, we have people on the border catching drugs. You probably see in busts all the time, all the fentanyl and everything. But they have to guard their product the whole way. They got to get it over that border, and then they've got to guard it all the way down their distribution chain to the end user for a one-time use. But if we take a child and that trafficker is bringing that child from Guatemala, all they have to do is get that child across Mexico. That's it. Because as soon as they get to the US border, we take that child. And then we care for the child, and then we deliver the child to the end user.
Oof.
And it's not a one-time use. This is over and over. So this is the thing that I just truly did not grasp, because I've never worked in child welfare or knew anything about trafficking, is that for a trafficker, a child is a residual income for them. It's their asset.
Yeah.
It's not like they're paying the child their wages, right? And anybody who doesn't believe this can go back and look at the 2014 case. You can read the Senate reports. You can listen to Senator, Portman and McCaskill go berserk on HHS during the Senate hearings. It's very interesting to go back and watch now, knowing what's happening. But they are seeing these children as residual income. So every hour, they've got a crew of kids who are working. They're getting paid off of that.
Right.
It's residual income for the life of the child. And now worse, if they're sex trafficking, it's residual income off every trick that child turns, girl or boy. Yeah. And it's happening.
Yeah.
Right now, today.
It actually, and it goes back even farther than 2014. I'm not sure if you're familiar. There was a book by an investigative journalist. His name's Nick Bryant, called The Franklin Scandal. And the Franklin Scandal got into this territory in the 80s. The Franklin Credit Union was this big African-American owned credit union that was doing a lot of promotion of African-American businesses in Omaha, Nebraska in the 70s. And the guy that took it over, his name was Lawrence King. He got exposed using the credit union as his own personal piggy bank. But the dark part that came out was that he was also trafficking kids from the orphanage in Omaha. And they were connected. So it was a Catholic orphanage with a Catholic bishop in charge of the orphanage, and the police chief, and a couple of the, the big business people in Omaha at the time. That all got, sort of caught up in this scandal. And the FBI eventually came in and got the three primary witnesses. Two of them to recant. And the one of them, they ended up putting her away. I forget what for. They locked her up, basically. And so there were never any charges against the people involved. But they've been doing this for a long time, and this is what they do. They use these disadvantaged kids, that don't have parents, that are in the orphanage system or the foster system. And now it seems like they're getting imports. They're importing them from Guatemala and other, countries. Mm-hmm. Like, the same way we would export our manufacturing to China, we've almost exported our sourcing for child trafficking to Guatemala and Venezuela and these other third world countries where the CIA had a history of sort of destabilizing in the mid 20th century.
Yeah, and you mentioned the vulnerability. It's like,
yes,
you can see an example of that as well in the bigger, more well-known case of the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, they used to drive through poor or underprivileged neighborhoods and
it's terrible.
Spot young girls outside of school and things like that, and they would try to target kids who they knew probably didn't have present parent figures. and that sort of thing were broke. They wanted money,
and then they
groom them
with these promises.
All these promises.
Exactly.
Fancy car. Look at all this money we have.
Yes.
We'll pay you very well.
You can be rich too.
You can be a massage therapist and work for us. We'll pay you very well. And that's what they do. They look for the vulnerable, and that's what predators do. Even in the wild. A predator that's hunting in the wild, it's going to look for the animal with the limp. It's going to look for the slowest one, the one that's falling behind the rest of the pack, and that's the one it's going to target. It works the same exact way in these.
Yes, it's terrible. It's terrible. And again, had I not read it in the Senate reports, had I not read books, there's another DHS whistleblower who came out in 2015. His name is Dr. Jason Piccolo, and he worked for DHS's human smuggling cell. And in 2015, he said, my life changed when I realized that we were giving children to criminals. And that was 2015. Wow. Now, the thing that's really, really has ratcheted up the problem that was exposed by the new DHS whistleblower from 2021, Aaron Stevenson, who is a true American hero.
We're going to speak with him this week as well. So it's great. It's great that we got you guys on the same week.
And hopefully we'll have like a live stream with you and Kyle and Aaron and everybody.
We'll do
that would be great. What's really cool is we all saw the same problem from a different angle, right?
So I guess well, I'll let you finish your point and then we'll lead into that.
I was going to say, well, it was because of his courage to come forward when he saw for the very first time, right, that transnational organized criminals, right, the TOC watch list, that there were people on that watch list who were sponsoring children. It has never happened in the history of this watch list until 2021. And these are high-level criminal actors who are here sponsoring children. And this is what he was trying to tell the whole intel community about, and nobody wanted to hear about it. And so people really need to look into who are these sponsors, because they're not vetting them.
Of course
they're not vetting them. And there is not one child welfare organization on the planet who is going to say, sure, let me give you 15 children and I'm never going to lay eyes on your house. I'm not going to see what your status is in the country, right? I'm not going to see if you have sufficient income to support these children. I'm never going to see your house. Here, bye, have fun. Yeah. No, that would never happen. And that's what's happening right now.
That just wouldn't even happen in a normal foster. I mean, imagine you had a normal American who was trying to foster some, dozen kids or whatever. Like, there's no way they would get away with that. Like, and we see the same thing. We're in New York City, and
okay.
So when we've had something like 50,000 of the migrants come here, and we're right next to one of the hotels where they're putting them up, the Watson, and they are they just changed it over. We had a brouhaha because there was a bunch of single men staying there, and now they've changed it over to be more, it's families only. But I've seen a lot of what appear to be families. It's like a male and female adult with very young children, but. I don't know.
We don't. How many of them are actually families, and how many of them are perhaps sponsors?
Well, and it seems like from what Tara's saying too, is that these might actually be legitimate families, and the scary part is that they're taking these kids and we're hand delivering them to the traffickers at dozens at a time.
Yes.
Yeah. The Watson situation was crazy. You probably heard about that in the news too. There was a protest, and some of them camped out in front of the hotel because they refused. It was only about a handful of them, and they were being egged on by left-wing activists, and they refused to leave and go to a new location that they were being placed at in Brooklyn so that they could clear the hotel and put the families in there. So that went on for a few days, and we covered it. We took some footage, and we kind of were giving updates on Twitter about that. And then New York City Antifa tried to dox us and accused us of harassing migrants for simply reporting on what was happening, in our neighborhood. And they try to dox us and all that stuff. And
Wow.
They're a bunch of cowards.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, the thing is that I believe the average person, and this is where some of the people like Antifa are playing on they're spinning lies or telling half truths to say that to vet sponsors for children is somehow anti-immigrant.
It's crazy.
And no, what it is pro-child. I don't understand if people were just in a dream world, like maybe like me, because I didn't know that they were trafficking in the program. But now that I do know and see the horrors of it, what I see is this is the most wicked form of abuse and exploitation I've ever witnessed in my life. I have seen children have panic attacks, know of children who were put on suicide watch, and one night heard a young girl screaming, I mean, inconsolable, screaming for her mother. And I'll never get over it. And so I know that these children don't know the people who they're going to because they say. And then James O'Keefe, right, and some wonderful undercover journalists at Project Veritas spent time knocking on doors.
Yep.
And when they did, you may have heard the stories that the children were telling. You know,
yes, I remember when that came out. But to lend to your point a bit about Antifa too, you know, like they're accusing us of harassing migrants, or they're saying that, you know, these policies of wanting to vet people where the children are going, like that's anti-migrant. If they were truly people who cared about these people as people and not just as political pawns and chess pieces in their drama triangles that they erect, you know, they would be talking about this issue.
Yes, they would.
They would set up their own little thing and interview Tara Rodas and say, how do we help these migrant children? No, yes. They don't do that. They don't open up their own homes to take them in or any of that. They just get out there and they protest and they harass people and all this stuff to seem virtuous and all that crap. But that's enough about them. I think we've spent enough time on Antifa. We'll move on to the next part of the story, which we've already touched on a bit. So from the point where it's like, now you know this is happening, there had to be a moment where you decided, I have to say something about this outside of just reporting it within my organization. I have to tell people. And you brought up Aaron Stevenson. So you saw Aaron Stevenson's story with Project Veritas.
Yes.
And if I recall correctly from your interview with Kyle Seraphin, that was kind of the thing that really helped motivate you to come out publicly and to also approach Project Veritas and to tell your story, right?
Yes. Now, there was one motivator prior to that.
Okay.
And I had already at this point, by the time I heard about Aaron's story, I was already starting to report through chains of command outside of the direct chain of command, also that there was trafficking going on. But I had not made full protected disclosures until Aaron. So what had happened is one day, and this is after the 4 boys in Austin, we would explain to case managers how to use the system correctly to see if a sponsor had sponsored multiple kids or if an address was a bad address. And sometimes I would specifically say, hey, this address in Gulf Freeway, or this address which is in Houston, Texas, or this address in Austin, hey, be aware of that. And one day a girl comes running up to me and she says, Tara, and it wasn't too long before I heard about Aaron's story. She said, Tara, we're sending another child to Austin. I'm like, what do you mean? Because at this point, we had a telecon with HHS, Office of Inspector General, which are fabulous people who investigate these sorts of crimes, kick in doors and get kids back and that type of a thing. And they were aware of the Austin case. So we'd given them Austin and we'd given them Bonita Springs, Florida. So I'm thinking the cavalry's coming, right? Well, what I learned is they don't have access to all of the data. So HHS is trying to hide who these sponsors are. Like right now, the guy who's a Guatemalan citizen who's sitting in Austin, Texas, who tried to get 4 kids. He's just free. Who knows how many kids he's gotten or has? Oof. No one's going to look at him, right? So this was, very disturbing. So when they tell me another kid is going there, I remember I picked up all my stuff. I thought for sure this has to be an accident. I go running down to the command center, and the federal field specialist was not there. And so an attorney who was actually my boss was there. And I said, look, I work for you. My goal is to make sure we don't end up on the front page of the Washington Post or the LA Times, right? I mean, here in DC, because my office is a block from the White House, I said, we always have this rule: don't get yourself on the front page of the Washington Post. It won't be good. So I said, look, I'm just saying this is concerning because somebody just told me we're sending another child to Austin, and supposedly this is under investigation right now. Right. And that attorney said to me, Tara, we only get sued if we keep kids in care too long. We don't get sued by traffickers. And I mean, I was stunned. She must have seen the look on my face. And she just moved in. She said, do you understand?
Wow.
Are we clear? We don't get sued by traffickers. And I was totally stunned. So at this point, when I knew that they were giving kids to traffickers, and their official legal position is we don't get sued by traffickers, so let's keep moving these kids, moving these kids. I was so determined at that point to dot every I, cross every T, report up every chain of command that I could, and had started at that point telling some folks outside. Then when I heard Aaron's disclosure, so I'm just sitting there on the Pomona Fairplex emergency intake site one evening, and I get the text from somebody that says, you've got to see this. And when I saw Aaron's disclosure, I thought, okay, if this is really true, that we are knowingly giving children to high-level criminal actors, I'm serious. I don't even know what I'm going to do at that point. And I was already telling people, I said, the day I get walked off the site, I can assure you it's going to be because of trafficking. That's what it's going to be because I'm not going to shut up about this. Now that I know that they know, and that their position is we don't get sued by traffickers, that I'm just telling you guys, the day I get walked off here. So I see Aaron's video. I take it around to the background check team. They're just regular people. They're not like law enforcement. There's no law enforcement on the site. HHS is not a law enforcement agency, right?
Right.
So I kept saying, can we get some FBI here? Can we get some CIA here? Can we get some agents here, some investigators, some analysts,
Anyone.
Anybody, right?
Where are the men with the guns?
Yes, men with badges and guns who can actually look at databases to see who are these crazy people sponsoring the kids, right? So it was less than 2 weeks after circulating Aaron's video that one of the case managers came up to me and she said, Tara, she said, I have this case that I feel very weird about. She said, I've had multiple conversations with the sponsor, who's female. And she said, the sponsor keeps talking about her activity with a gang. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, every conversation, somehow it gets back to, she really wasn't guilty of crimes. And, she just was, involved with the guy in the gang. And I said, all right, this is strange. I said, based especially on Aaron's video, I said, just see what you can get from her. Because obviously, if someone is here and they're not a U.S. citizen and they don't have permanent resident status, so they've entered the country illegally themselves, we don't know, and we don't have real background checks going on. We don't know what their criminal history is. So if they've never committed a crime here in the United States, they're not going to come up on a surface level background. It's not going to happen. So unless we're looking at background checks at high levels and working with international law enforcement, or at least the consulates in each one of the embassies in each one of the countries. How are we ever going to know? So she, fortunately, is really, really good. And she got the woman to self-disclose. And the woman actually sent us her adjudication paperwork. She had served time for her involvement with gangs. And it was a very serious case where we had hard evidence, and she was attempting to simultaneously sponsor 2 children. She was getting a female from the from the Fort Bliss emergency intake site, and she was also sponsoring a male from our site in Pomona, California. And that's what got everybody in a tailspin. And, you know, I started being accused of things. Someone asked me, maybe I needed to check my biases. I'm like, my biases? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you know, you might not know me, but my husband is from El Salvador. I volunteered to help migrant children. What are you talking about? So anyway, it was just weird. Everything changed after I turned in this transnational criminal organization for sponsoring kids. And it was just a short time after that, they then took me off the TCO case. They accused me of wrongdoing. They escorted me off the site under threat of investigation. Because I'm like, are you saying you might send me home? And they're like, well, maybe. Well, my agency has no idea what I'm doing, right? They don't know I'm working trafficking cases. They have no need to know that. So anyway, they found out that I had shared with the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General. I made 2 protected disclosures explaining this process, and then 2 protected disclosures to HHS Office of Inspector General, which you're not supposed to be able to be retaliated against, right? As a whistleblower for seeing something and saying something, but they found out and they were like, we got to get her off the site. So they did. Midday, they escort me off the site in front of my peers. It's not a fun thing when you realized, holy smokes, my whole career is about to go up in flames. And I remember saying, is there any chance, you know, I could be fired? And they're like, well, you know, it's possible, but we don't think so. We're going to investigate. And I'm like,
well, that's what drives me up the wall the most. Is that they're threatening to investigate
the gaslighting,
but
the reversal.
They won't investigate the stuff that you're trying to expose. And there's very clear red flags that they should investigate. And it's like, no, we're going to investigate you.
It's that reversal. As if you have done something wrong here when you're pointing out, gee, oh my God, our system's being used by human traffickers to traffic children.
Yeah.
Alert, alert, alert. They're like, no, shh. Tara.
I know.
Tara, stop it.
I know. We don't get sued by traffickers. Shh. Yeah. Let's just move the kids. I mean,
who cares? It's just from the third world, like
demons.
What the heck?
Totally. I know. It's really horrifying. And when you think about it, in the 6 months period that the Pomona Fairplex emergency intake site was open, it was only open 6 months. We moved over 8,300 children.
Wow.
We distributed them all across the country. Okay. This is only 8,300 of the more than 120,000 we released.
From one site.
And I saw a level of evil and just exploitation in just this small number. And when I think that in just this 8,300, the level, it's just the tip of the iceberg, because hundreds of thousands of these children have come across the border and the government has spent billions of dollars to ship them around. This is only the tiny tip of the iceberg. And we know for sure, because of Aaron's disclosure, never in the history of the program has a member of a transnational criminal organization sponsored or attempted to sponsor a child.
Until now.
Yeah.
Until now.
On the
and then,
thanks, Joe Biden. Thanks.
Insane.
DHS,
Insane.
like, wow.
So, you know, you see Aaron's story. all of that happens. You get it squared off the site, which is,
Yep.
honestly good for you because you called that. You were like, I guarantee you, if they walk me off this place, you already know that it's going to be like this. And you were right. You already had that gut feeling, which is usually correct. So all of that happens. When did you approach Project Veritas about this and decide, well, you know what? They already kicked me out. I'm going all in.
Yeah. So I reported right through all the chains of command. I let my whole office know, right? I had recorded interviews, which I'm so thankful for now, because nobody can ever go back and say, well, she made this stuff up, right? Because, well, obviously we have all the email traffic, we have all kinds of stuff, but
on record.
Also those recorded interviews that are on the record, that I was saying the same thing then as I'm saying today. Traffickers are getting the children. So after I get through that whole process, right, demobilization, coming back to DC, trying to assimilate into work life again, and just with the burden for these children, wondering what is going on and trying to find a whistleblower protection attorney, right? Because I didn't want to lose my job for something that, right, I'm calling out fraud, waste, and abuse, and I should not lose my job because of that. And I was having a really hard time finding an attorney, and I thought, wow, Aaron is still working at DHS. So that means he must have a good attorney. So that's when I called Project Veritas. So I originally called them to see if they would put me in touch with Aaron.
Okay.
So I'm sure they were just like, you've got to be kidding me. Like when they get my call, right? I said, hey, I know this is going to sound really weird. And I, fortunately, the undercover journalist who picked up the phone that night they'd been receiving so many tips of trafficking in the program. People at the airlines. There were people who were working the transportation company. So MVM, right? People have been afraid to come forward, but people who work at the transportation company were like, hey, these kids are telling me that they don't know who they're going to. They've had whistleblowers too.
Yeah. And
then there were other whistleblowers around the country, but they wouldn't come out and have their face shown. They were always in the shadows. Mm-hmm. So, and Project Veritas didn't have hard evidence or actual addresses to go to. And so I said, well, I've got a spot here where I know we've got a bunch of kids. I have a spot here where I know we have a bunch of kids, and here. And they were the only ones who said, we're going to go knock on doors.
Hell yeah.
And that's what they did. Boots on the ground. And, the stories they told me, it's horrifying, because obviously what they showed in the video is a small clip of some of the children, right? And one is a 15-year-old girl. She came here to go to school, and she had to quit school to pay her debt to the cartel. And then a 16-year-old girl who's being pimped out by her aunt, who is her sponsor, right? Who she's never met. She doesn't know if this woman is her aunt or not. And it's horrific. It's unconscionable that federal dollars are going to exploit children.
It's infuriating. It is.
It is.
I get goosebumps even thinking about it right now, because
it just makes you want to rage.
It makes me want to rage, and
molecules flying
there was
apart.
More that I could do. I don't really know what else to do about the situation, and that's why we're doing this and talking about it, because I feel kind of helpless. Like,
call your lawmakers.
Call your lawmakers.
Your local,
your
state senator, your state representatives, and then also your federal. You got your senator and your House of Representatives. Know who those people are. Call them and talk to them, and just express that you are concerned about children being trafficked over the southern border because of revelations from Project Veritas, from Tara Rodas, and from Aaron Stevenson.
Give them
others.
The receipts, to provide them the links, and say, what are you doing about this?
Exactly. Yes.
I guarantee you, if they get a dozen calls about that, all of a sudden it's going to be on their radar.
Yeah.
Right.
the more people that do that, and that's something that anybody can do. Anybody,
Yes.
you don't even have to leave your name. You can just tell me you live in your district. You don't have to give full disclosure of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
There's something everyone can do, just a little, and if everybody does just a little tiny bit, we can get closer to saving these kids.
People,
yes, that's right. And I think that's something else that people need to understand. There are children right now, at this very moment, who are in crisis. There are children. People think working in a slaughterhouse around bone crushers and chemicals that burn the children, that is not the worst of what some of these children are going through.
Right.
And there must be accountability. There has to be accountability. There are things happening right now to children that we probably make us sick to the point of vomiting if we knew what was happening to some of these children. It is urgent, and it doesn't even seem believable that we are witnessing government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking, but we are. And, after the New York Times ran their article and talked about all the children who they talked to in all the different states, the administration comes out and says, oh, we're going to have the Department of Labor crack down. Okay, great. That's a good place to start. But it's a cover for what's really happening, which is HHS with billions of dollars is creating a pull and a distribution chain for trafficking. HHS, this program must be reformed if we're going to stop seeing this exploitation of children.
Yeah, this is aiding and embedding of child trafficking.
And, like Brent said, contact your lawmakers and let them know that this is happening. But people need to know that it's happening first.
Yes.
And that's the thing is people don't realize that this is happening. No.
And it's also, like you said,
you didn't even realize it.
It's incredibly hard to believe. It's just everything everything that we've been programmed with to current would suggest that if anything like that was happening,
we would
the
certainly
FBI
know about it.
The FBI with their, I think it's like $80 billion they get a year.
Yeah.
The CIA with their untold budgets, DHS, another couple of billion per year. You think that they would do something about this.
Yes.
But they're not.
Yeah, well, we know through Kyle that.
And it's like, you had to get Project Veritas to go to these actual locations and knock on the door.
Yes.
Before anybody from, a federal law enforcement or even local law enforcement.
And then they didn't even know what doors to knock on until someone like Tara chose to spoke up and point the way. And that's another thing too, I hope that more people in the HHS familiarize themselves with your story, and because perhaps they're seeing similar things as you but don't really quite understand what it is themselves, and I hope maybe if they see what you've realized and how big this actually is, but also like what you've been through and that you survived. No one's assassinated you yet. I hope that doesn't happen.
We have cameras. And I always tell people my breaks are good. My husband takes care of all of that.
Breaks are good. Tara is not suicidal, everyone.
Nope.
She loves life and God and all of that. And she knows what she's doing and why she's doing it. Anyone who wants to blow the whistle, like you should. You very much should. You will have a support system. You'll have other whistleblowers back you up. You'll have us. You'll have Project Veritas, James O'Keefe, all these people who care about this issue. They will back you up, but it's going to take a risk. You're going to have to take a risk of some sort. And I imagine for you, it was a really scary, difficult thing to decide, well, not only am I going to talk about this to my higher ups, and then once all of that played out, to decide, well, I'm going to talk about this publicly and I'm going to put my face to it and tell the world about it. So, after all of that, I guess we'll get into the aftermath of that. So how has your life changed since you decided to go public with this stuff?
Yeah, well, my life will never be the same. It'll never be the same. And I didn't know that when I got on the plane to go to Dallas for training and then deployed to California, that I was going to become a voice for migrant children. I had no idea. I just thought I was going to play games with kids.
Yeah.
But I will not stop speaking out. And so it's been really a blessing that so many people like you care. And that's the thing that I've learned. There are so many people who really do care, and they do want to see justice done for these children, because this is horrific. Once people get past, there's like this natural block to not want to see this level of darkness, right? Or this level of evil. I know, because I felt it. I was like, no. I don't want to see. I don't want to hear. And
have the belief that it's not happening.
It's not just that.
And that's the hardest part.
They realize too that once they allow themselves to acknowledge it, then
now they have to do something.
Now you have to do something. If you have a conscience, at least, unless you're someone who doesn't, or you're able to just switch that off and to focus.
No,
on
normal people
else.
Can't ignore something like this.
No,
especially with children.
You just can't. And so once I finally settled, right, that I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this message out, whatever it takes, right? Then there's a real freedom in that wow, this is my new mission, and anyone who will listen, I'm going to talk to about it. So it's been really great, because there have been some lawmakers, who have come forward. There have been attorney generals who in the states, right, who have come forward and said, hey, we want to hear your testimony. Come talk to us. So I've talked to prosecutors, I've talked to legislators, and I intend to continue to talk to legislators. And I'm really hoping that, and these are state legislators, because I believe it's going to have to be at the state where people are going to say, okay, wait a minute. If I'm the governor of, let's just say, Virginia, because that's where I live in Virginia. So if I'm Youngkin, how is it that the federal government is going to be sending people to my state, children to my state, and not tell me where they're going, or worse, the high-level criminal actors they are going to? And knowing that's the worst thing, right? So people on the talk are sponsoring children all up and down the East Coast here, in Virginia, right? In DC, in New Jersey, in Maryland, all here on the East Coast. These are high-level criminal actors that are on the transnational organized crime watch list. And so the federal government is sending them here. They're aware of it, and they're not telling me as the governor. I'd be like, oh no, federal government, you don't have the right to do that. So you're sending kids to my state? Marvelous. I just want to know who the sponsors are. How is it that kids are missing, right? All these kids are missing. Really? How many doors have you knocked on?
Yeah, why aren't you?
Probably zero. That's unacceptable. They've got a list. They actually have the ID of every sponsor. They have an address of every sponsor. We bought plane tickets or train tickets to every sponsor. So you should know exactly where the children are and who they're with. But they won't go after the sponsors. And they won't give up the sponsors. But somebody needs to make them, because it's unacceptable. You cannot pass all state, with this level of secrecy and no transparency whatsoever, and import vulnerable children into my state, right, that I can't follow up on or check up on, to known criminal actors that you're not telling me about. No, federal government, you should not be able to do that.
Well, it's just like, how is it possible that the Department of Homeland Security, just thinking the name, the Department of Homeland Security, knows that there are these high-level criminal actors in a location, and they're not like, heads up, local law enforcement?
Yeah. Right? No, instead, what did they do when somebody came forward?
They're protecting them, and they're sending them kids.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make any sense unless you start to want to get into the tinfoil hat, territory of thinking this is an agenda from on high, that, they're pushing this because somebody somewhere wants this.
Yeah.
And the way that they retaliate against individual whistleblowers when the situation is brought to public consciousness, it suggests that that's the most likely explanation.
Kind of seems that way. You have to wonder how many of the politicians themselves probably are benefiting from this in some way. It would be interesting to connect some of those dots.
Well, it's a lot of money, I can tell you that. I mean, you're talking for anybody can go. This is all public information. So people can go to the HHS website, which, by the way, it's a $2.7 trillion department. Okay, that's a lot of money. Okay, trillion. All right.
Crazy.
And the unaccompanied children program, which is under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, anybody can go in and follow the chain on their website. So it's HHS, Administration for Children and Families, Office of Refugee Resettlement, and then unaccompanied children program is one of the programs under Office of Refugee Resettlement. Anybody can look and see the more than $10 billion they've spent and where that money is going. And why might it be going there? Or why did it take that amount of money? So you're telling me you're going to be spending close to $1 billion for a site that's only going to be open for 6 months, and you can't keep the children safe? Sorry, you don't deserve that amount. No way. It's unacceptable with the level of technology that we have that one child should be missing from a program.
Yes.
Unacceptable.
Yeah.
And yet they don't know where like 20 to 30% of the children are.
That is not.
Yet we're reading in the news, oh, well, we just had a bus for 100 migrant children here. Some as young as middle schoolers. This is what's just astounding. People wonder, why am I seeing all this migrant labor? Why are they having all these busts? Well, thank you, HHS.
Yeah, they weren't doing their due diligence.
No, they're not.
And when, as soon as it was indicated that there was a problem, they doubled down and covered it up instead of doing the right thing and being like, we have a problem here, and bringing it to the attention of, the people responsible for signing the checks or whatever. But I think that is the way to go after it. We need to defund child trafficking here in the United States.
Refund the police, defund child trafficking.
Right. I mean, we had FBI knock on our door because we went down to do some journalism for January 6th and interview, people in the crowd and talk to people. And we had FBI knock on our door.
Yeah, they can come look for us,
and they can't go knock on the doors of
sponsors.
Some of these sponsors who are getting dozens of kids. I mean, nothing makes sense.
They clearly have the resources, and they clearly have the information, as Tara has.
They do have the information, 100%. Yep.
Why the hell aren't they doing it? You have to ask that question.
Yes.
And Brent said it kind of makes you put the tinfoil hat on and think, well, there's some higher level people involved in this that clearly like the conditions that have now been established for some reason. And it makes you wonder how many of those kids are ending up in the back rooms with some of these lawmakers or something like that. So you have to wonder. I don't know how else to think about it.
At some point, the truth is going to come out. That's what I always say. Give it enough time. Just like back in 2014, it took them time to figure all of that out and discover it and investigate it and figure out who was behind it. Indict some people, put them away in prison, what an amazing concept. Yeah. Criminals in prison.
Whoa.
Who would have thought?
That they've been keeping criminals out of prison.
That's the
and defunding, police departments. I was just reading an article about Austin, Texas, and how they're having a real problem there with understaffing of just the regular police. They've got something like 300 vacancies and an additional, I think, 77 retirements that are expected this month from the department because they're demoralized. They defunded the department in 2019. Then they had to refund it in 2021 because of the Texas state law that forced them to fund their police. But by that point, the damage had already been done. And the DA there, who's I'm pretty sure he took money from George Soros.
I think so.
The DA had charged
Imagine
19
that.
officers in Austin for, police brutality and related stuff during the riots of St. Floyd in 2020. So they went after the cops for dealing with, what was essentially a nationwide riot across multiple municipalities. Went after the cops, completely demoralized them, took away their funds. So of course they left, and they also got rid of cadet classes, which was a big point. There were 3 cadet classes that were coming up in 2019, and they canceled them all. So it's across the board, we have this sort of weird thing where high up people that are in charge are facilitating crime instead of combating it.
Yeah.
And, it's going to take more people waking up screaming, to their politicians and the media before we're going to get a change in circumstances.
Yeah.
People must realize the status quo is not good.
It's not good.
No, it isn't. And people have to say, do I want to have children working in slave labor in my community? Am I okay with that? Am I okay with not having the same level of safety I used to have? I mean, does this make any sense? This makes no sense whatsoever, because at its basic level, I mean, I'm just a, simple person here. At its basic level, the government should keep criminals locked up to protect the rights of the citizens, right? You need to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. I don't know. That seems pretty simple.
So
it's working for the president of El Salvador. Bukele's doing a great job down there. And I think that's because he's doing such a great job. It's also, I think, forcing a lot of criminal element out of there to here. And of course, with us dumping billions of dollars into the system, we're creating a pull. So it's, it's really sad, but I hope people will really think about it. I mean, do we really want to be a nation where people are coming in desperate hope, right, of a new life, and this is the life we're going to give them? That just doesn't make sense. It's evil. That's all I can say. It's wicked.
Evil is the word.
They think that they're open border and all this rhetoric. They think they're really helping.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they can't even acknowledge that their desire to have the border be open and to have more people come in to seek a better life is being exploited by criminals and psychopaths to abuse children at scales we can't even grapple with. We're talking thousands or even tens of thousands of kids.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands.
Another thing too is
it's insane problem.
Another thing people need to ask themselves as well is, do you want to pay for that? Do you want to continue paying for that? Because we're being taxed out the ass by the government. And do you want that money to actually go towards this stuff because it's helping to fund it?
Even if you aren't, if you're poor, you're not making a lot of money, you're not paying a lot of taxes, it's causing inflation. So we're getting taxed one way or the other. Inflation is really just it's sort of a hidden or a covert tax. Because what they do is they just print money endlessly to support these programs and sign notes like IOUs, and they either go to China or to the future. And it inflates our money supply. So
devalues the currency, and meanwhile, all the products
facilitating all these. Yeah, it's. I don't know what to say about it other than it's insane. We're living in crazy times, and at its most basic, the government is there to protect individual liberty, to protect people from so that their rights are respected.
Yes.
And while I would love for more people from the world to be able to enjoy the liberties and the safety that we tend to have here in the United States, we can't just have an open border and
not practical
and not follow up on these people.
Not humane.
It's destroying lives, and we are being used as Americans to do it. And silence means we're complicit. So if you're hearing this story, and you can say la la la, I don't believe you, but unfortunately the reality is this is happening. There's enough evidence out there for you to come to that conclusion on your own.
Oh yeah.
And that means you got to do something. We need all hands on deck. This is a red alert. Stop.
Total red alert. Share this episode. Share the Project Veritas story. definitely get this information out there and talk about it. Have personal conversations in your life too with people that and ask them, do you know that this is happening?
Yeah.
Do you know that your tax dollars are paying for this? What do you think about that? And they might not believe you at first because, like we mentioned,
they won't.
don't want to acknowledge that level of darkness.
Yeah.
They definitely don't want to acknowledge that the people who are in power and are supposed to be protecting our rights and all of that stuff and, standing up for human dignity and law and order and all this crap are helping to facilitate that very level of crime and evil, because it is evil. You use the word evil, and I think it's the most appropriate word to use. I know some people don't like it because of the religious connotations. No, that's the word. It is evil.
It is evil. It is. That's what it is. And these are children. I think this is the thing that people just don't understand. I mean, they are, some of them, middle schoolers. Crazy. Well, and actually, if you watch the Project Veritas video, and this is heartbreaking, right? Because I've actually talked to the journalists, the undercovers, who were knocking on those doors. And there's one little girl. She didn't know like her age, but she looks to be about 5 years old. And she was living with multiple older men. And the undercover journalist with tears was like, Tara, I don't know if she's been bathed in months.
What?
She's like, that poor little thing. She said, I just wanted to take her, And this is what's happening. Why are there all these places where I don't think people fully grasp that the government is sending children, right? Multiple children to addresses where sometimes there's 3 and 4 sponsors living at that address, and they're each sponsoring multiple kids. I mean, this is unreal.
It's sus, as the children would say, suspicious. It doesn't make
very suspicious, yes, and it's unacceptable. And
at the very least, we should have representatives from law enforcement going to knock on these doors and talk to these people. Yes. And if there's any indication that the child hasn't been bathed in months or is emotionally distraught, they should be taking those children, out of that situation immediately.
Yes.
And making sure they don't end up in another situation.
I mean, I watch videos on TikTok of people picking cats off the side of the road, and treating these cats with more care and more dignity than our government is offering towards these trafficked children and delivering them into the hands of people who would do them harm.
Yeah.
Infuriating.
Yeah.
We already mentioned, some things you can do, call lawmakers, make a ruckus about this. But I wanted to ask Tara, what do you think are the next steps? And I guess we'll end with this. Where do we go from here? How do we approach this to not only get the word out, but to make sure some accountability is actually, facilitated from our discussions and all the information put out?
Yeah, well, so I think that we're going to have to acknowledge that what we're looking at is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking, and say, you know what? We will not tolerate that. And HHS is just going to have to confess, which no agency wants to do.
No.
I have lost control of my program, which is what's happened.
Yeah.
HHS has lost control of the unaccompanied child program. And they're going to need some way to get this thing back under control. And what that means is they cannot be sending children to unvetted sponsors. There is no child welfare organization on the planet that's going to be sending children, multiple children, to people that they've never seen their home.
Right.
They can't prove that they can care for the child. No relation to the child, no idea how many people are living in the household. This makes no sense. Not knowing the criminal history of the person that you're giving children to. It makes absolutely no sense, which is what makes it so unbelievable, yet real, because anybody can look on the website. So I think it's going to involve, some high level people in HHS are going to have to give account. Now, interestingly, on December 5th, multiple senators wrote a letter to Secretary Becerra asking him to give account for these allegations. There's been no response. So, it might be interesting to say, to try to encourage HHS to try to give an account. So call your senators, call your representatives and say, hey, on December 5th, the Secretary of HHS was asked about this and he hasn't replied. Why not?
Yeah, it's been months, 3 months now.
Yep.
Where the hell's that reply? Come on.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It almost makes it seem like they want to just sweep the whole thing under the rug. They don't want to deal with it at all. And that is disheartening.
It's very disheartening, but there's not a rug big enough to put this mess under.
Oh, yeah.
This is big. I mean, when the government loses control of a program, this is what can happen, right? When there's no oversight, when there's no accountability, when this is what can happen. And that's why oversight is very important in federal programs, and there has to be transparency. And right now, HHS is doing things under the cover of night, and they're not being transparent, and we need to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
It reminds me almost of the situation in Ukraine, too. It's another situation where we're just throwing billions and billions of dollars at the problem with very little accountability.
Yeah.
And it's just it's kind of almost dragging us closer and closer to World War III with Russia. And it's just like the administration is just like, it's fine. We'll put more money, send them tanks, give them missiles, whatever and it's like, hello, like what is going, like there are no adults in the room. It feels like, the adults in the room are like the podcast community and whistleblowers. It's like, oh, this is a big, I mean, and when the most serious people are like podcasters and whistleblowers,
we're
and
in trouble.
We're in big trouble here.
Yeah.
It's like the people that are supposed to be the adults in the room are not doing their jobs.
Well, we have to put the pressure on them. That's the only way anything's going to get done, and keep talking about it. Don't shut up about it. Take an example from Tara and grow a spine.
Maybe now, we haven't really had the opportunity to talk about this on the show, but Project Veritas has been going through this big brouhaha at the falling out of James versus the board. And, it seems like a lot of the popular opinion is to side with James, but the nuanced opinion that nobody wants to get into is there may actually be a legitimate gripe here that James may have been misappropriating funds.
And I don't even want to get too much into the details of the conflict.
Well, but this is the thing: is that this conflict is distracting from very real stories.
Exactly, and there is
what I want to talk about is
the story, right?
People are more focused on the conflict between the board and James. And now,
frankly, who cares?
Frankly,
this is
the important stuff. It's the stories. It's always been the stories. Like
exactly.
James goes off and does his own thing, and he's still covering good stories. And Project Veritas continues to do their own thing, and they're still covering important stories. The stories are what matter, and we should be caring about that. I see people on Twitter going after Aaron, going after you for still saying, hey, there are good people working at Project Veritas. Hard workers, undercover journalists, people who helped make these stories possible to bring them. It wasn't just James. People don't like to hear that. And I know James was the face. I know he started it from the ground up. And none of us are saying that he didn't do that. But he built a huge team, and he needed that team to be able to do the level of work that was being done. And it wasn't just James doing it. There were a lot of other people involved. So the stories are what matter. That's the message that I want people to hear.
Right. And I will say, I posted today, I was with James on Saturday at CPAC and his new whistleblower, Debbie. And hey, shout out to Debbie for calling out Pfizer. But James wants the truth to continue to come out, right? And see, James is Project Veritas, and Project Veritas is James. It's his organization and his vision.
Yeah.
And there is no other James O'Keefe. I mean, he's the true guerrilla journalist, right? As he calls himself. Sure. And there's no other organization that's gone out and knocked on doors. And James, because of the story, right? He cares about the stories and getting to the truth. And he's like, Tara, by whatever means necessary, right? we need to keep looking to the future. And that's what he told me. He says, we're going to look to the future and we're going to believe for good things. And we're going to keep getting the truth out. And that's what we all need to focus on, and not be sidetracked. And I was kind of stunned to get sniped at by giving an update on child trafficking. Yeah. I think people thought I worked for Project Veritas. I'm like, no, hello,
it's
I'm
crazy,
a whistleblower.
But that's what broke my heart so much about the situation is that, look, whether or not James ever rejoins, that remains to be seen. I don't think he will, but who knows? But the point is, the people at Veritas do want to continue covering the story and the Pfizer story. They just posted about that today. And, they reshare a video, or they share a new video about this from you. And people are just like, I don't care, or whatever, or we don't trust you anymore. It's like, dude, this is important information, and you're over here hung up on this conflict that happened within the company and not focusing on the story itself, and then calling people like you a traitor and all this stuff because you're still allowing Veritas to talk about this and you're working with them. And it doesn't mean you can't work with them and work with James. Like, why do we have to even choose in a matter of these things? It's ridiculous.
Right. But what I've always said is I'm going to stand with James O'Keefe. And that's what I put on the video, right? If anybody saw all of the whistleblowers say their names, what they blew the whistle on, and I stand with James O'Keefe. And I'm also not going to put gasoline on a fire that comes at a very strange time on an organization that's getting the truth out there. So I'm not going to pour gasoline on that fire when I know I've sat across the table from undercover journalists in tears over what they were seeing on the ground. There are some very good-hearted people who work there. But just like we don't control what goes on Capitol Hill,
they don't control either.
They don't control what's going on.
That's another thing too I want to clarify here is like, people have this whole idea about the board and of the directors and what they actually do. And, I have a friend who works at Project Veritas, and I can confirm to everyone, the board of directors is not involved in the day-to-day activities of what happens at the headquarters. They're not. That's not what they do. That's not within their realm of influence. The team does that. They are determining the stories that they cover. And if they want to follow up on Tara's story, they're not being directed to do that. If they want to follow up on the Pfizer story, which they're going to do, they're not being directed to do that either. Like they are legitimately they want to cover the stories, that's the point. The conflict that happened between the board and James, and were there a few employees who had some complaints and stuff like that? Yes, but a few. There's 65 employees there. Most of these people were not involved in that conflict. They just want to continue to do their job. And I see people saying, well, if they were loyal to James, they should just walk. I'm like, look, I love James. I think he, is a heroic dude. But right now, he doesn't have a new thing set up. He has no means to collect money in which to pay employees. People can't just walk away from their job. They have bills and families to feed and all that stuff. So it's it's a complicated situation, and people don't want to look at the nuance of it. Yeah, New York City in the background.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. But and who knows? Maybe they'll be able to come to some grand agreement in the end. But whatever it is, if people want to know what my position is, I stand with James O'Keefe because James went out and he knocked on the doors, and he also has the whistleblowers' backs. I mean, he stands behind every single person who comes to him. And so trust me, when you not only think, okay, now I'm exposing transnational criminal organizations, and I'm also concerned I might get raided by the FBI. I mean, there's a lot of stress there. You have to go to somebody who you can trust, who has your back, and they're not just trying to get a story, but they're trying to help a situation. This was a 9-month investigation.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. I don't see other news organizations, doing that. So I stand by James. I posted my photo with him on this morning that I took, at CPAC on Saturday. And James is an incredible person, and I believe he's going to do more incredible things in the future.
Definitely.
Yeah, without a doubt. He's definitely determined. He definitely cares about the work.
So you hit on an interesting point there with the timing of this. I'll call it an attack on the institution of Project Veritas, because I do think that there is some sort of coordinated whatever to sort of create this divisive. There's a lot of division that I've seen recently too, especially among different conservative organizations that were very effective previously. We saw Daily Wire and Steven Crowder. We saw Project Veritas. Just across the board, there's been a lot of this division. And, Daniel's been very close at monitoring the response on social media. A lot of negative comments about Project Veritas, and I can't help but suspect that a lot of it is disingenuous, a lot of it is bad faith, a lot of it is bot accounts, or it could even be, farms of people. These people that have been trafficked, they could be being told, that they have to tweet this, that, the third. Like, that happens in the third world, so it could possibly happen here too.
Like I said, the biggest issue I have with the whole thing really is the fact that it's distracting from the
stories,
the important stories. And
the stories. The stories are what matters.
Who cares about the drama? I mean, you're talking about institutionalized child trafficking. Like,
it's like priorities, people. Priorities.
Yes. And high-level criminal actors that have set up operations here. So I'm so glad that you're going to be talking to, to Aaron, who's become a very, very great friend of, mine and my husband's. And I mean, he's like my brother. It's so crazy that, all of our stories have connected, right? One whistleblower gets the next whistleblower because you see something. And so many people, there have been people within HHS who've reached out to me. And that's pretty incredible.
That is.
But, and I'm hoping some of those people will come forward too, because they have other data that I don't have. So hopefully, more people will come forward, but it's the stories. And, it's interesting. I try to tell people, look, we have a common goal here. And the common goal is to get the truth out to people. Mm-hmm. If people say, I don't care about child trafficking, which I can't imagine anybody saying that. That's one thing, but at least people have the truth. I believe that when people hear this story and understand that their tax dollars are trafficking vulnerable migrant children into horrific slave labor and sex trafficking, and some people have said worse. I think people are going to stand up and say, hey, HHS, what's going on here? You have lost control of your program. You need to regain control of your program. And what are you going to do to protect these children? So that's what I believe. And we need to remember there's a common goal. We need to get the truth out there and into the public square where people can at least hear what's really happening and not fake news, from the, corporate media networks.
Because they're just so reliable over at the New York Times and CNN. And, it's just like, thank God for Project Veritas. I mean, they've been doing the good work really since WikiLeaks got sort of taken out by the little operation against Julian Assange. He was doing sort of a similar thing on an international level, and look what they did to him.
Yeah.
Different way he was operating,
different
but definitely
things,
similar. He was doing like info dumps and dumping documents and that whole sort of thing. But it's God, what a crazy time to be in the
Thank you, Tara, for deciding to come forward, for coming on the show, for making your decision to leak to Project Veritas and to blow that whistle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because it really takes just, normal people like you who see something, who decide, this is not right. We need to stop this.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I get tears in my eyes just thinking about the situation that these kids are in. Like it's horrific.
I had goosebumps a few times during this conversation.
Yeah.
I would say probably easly one of our most important conversations.
Yeah. Well, I don't think my husband would be upset if I shared, there were many times because, I worked 6 days a week and worked 3 weeks straight without a day off. And we were working 12, 14, 16 hours a day. So I would get to see my husband, sometimes on the weekend and on my one day off, if I got the whole day off, which I didn't always get the whole day off. And we cried. My husband he just could not believe that children from his country of El Salvador, right, were being forced into slave labor and trafficked. So this is a horrific thing. And if you have eyes to see the truth here, it hurts. I mean, it just does. It hurts. So I'm so thankful for what you all do. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my story. And, you know, I can't wait for people to hear Aaron's story. Yes. Because if it wasn't for Aaron, you know, he's a true hero, just like Kyle. I mean, they're out there to try to protect the rest of us. And, you know, when I look at the sacrifice of Kyle Seraphin or Aaron, they gave up their careers to speak the truth. And you have to say, why would somebody do that if it wasn't serious, right? So I'm very thankful to them, and I'm thankful to you all. Thank you so much for everything that you do, you know, to get the truth out there. And you need to be safe in New York City.
We don't leave the apartment that often.
Nah, I mean, I go out all the time. I go to the gym and stuff, but you know, I definitely try to do my best to look like someone that you probably wouldn't mess with.
Yes.
Muscle on and all that. But
Tara, they can find you on Twitter at Tara Lee Rodas. That's correct, right?
Do you
Yep.
have
Link in the description.
Do you have a website?
Well, it's under construction, so not really. It will be available at some point in the future. There is a website under construction. You will be able to find me eventually. But, you know, I'm new to all of this, so I don't have social media really set up yet. But I will.
Your Twitter,
And
so you
you
can find Tara in the description, and I'll also put a link to your Project Veritas expose so people can follow up.
And your YouTube channel. You only got 5 subscribers. People, go subscribe to Tara's YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah. So I kind of did that to just collect all the videos together. So I've never told anybody that even exists. But yeah, people are welcome to go there, only because what I did was I put all the videos that I was able to find. That was kind of my research little site. But yeah, so people can go there too. That's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah, well, I saw the link on your Twitter, and I'm just like, come on, we need to get some traction on this thing. So
yes. So if you go to playlists, if you click on playlists for people, those are videos that people can go and look at. So that's where I was kind of collecting all the videos, and that includes the Frontline video that shows the child trafficking all the way back in 2014. So yeah,
really good. Yeah, totally.
That's a good resource. Yeah. So if anyone wants to learn more about this topic and have some links to share with other people, perhaps that you are talking to about it, go to Stop Taxpayer Funded Child Trafficking on YouTube and share some of that content. Go support Tara. And thank you again, Tara, for speaking with us. We really appreciate it. And thanks for being brave and for doing what you're doing. Like, I seriously commend you. Like, it takes a lot of guts.
Well, thanks. Once you look into those little faces, it didn't seem courageous. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Yeah. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. Stay safe. Stay sane, fam. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, make clips, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yes.